Zayden Voss didn't expect to chase after a stranger through Terminal B of JFK, but a flash of burgundy on the floor caught his eye and changed everything. He bent down and picked up the passport, flipping it open. "Sierra Nolan," he read quietly, scanning the photo. Her eyes were bright, her mouth slightly uncertain in the picture. She looked young, early 20s maybe, and the kind of beautiful that didn't seem to know it. "Excuse me," he called after a woman up ahead, weaving through the crowd. "You dropped this." But she didn't hear him. He looked back down at the passport. "Sierra Nolan. Born in Oregon. Flying to Florence, Italy. Departure, today. Gate, B27. He glanced up at the signs and realized she was heading the wrong way. Zayden took off after her. He didn't normally do this sort of thing. He didn't chase. People came to him. They always had investors, journalists, women. He was Zayden Voss, CEO of Vostech, billionaire by 31, private jet parked at Teterboro, and yet here he was sprinting through an airport like a lunatic over a girl he'd never met. He caught up to her near a coffee kiosk. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath, holding out the passport. "You dropped this." She turned, startled. Her eyes were even brighter in person, a kind of stormy blue, and her hair was falling out of a messy bun, strands sticking to her cheek. "Oh my God," she breathed. "That's mine. I thank you. You have no idea what would have happened if I lost this." "You'd miss your flight to Florence," he said, handing it to her. Her head tilted. "How do you know I'm going to Florence?" He held up the passport. "It's not a secret." She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made people turn their heads. Pure, unrehearsed, a little chaotic. "I'm Sierra," she said, tucking the passport into her bag. "Thank you, seriously. I would have had a meltdown at security." "I'm Zayden." He extended his hand. She shook it. Her grip was firm, but her palm was soft. "Zayden." She squinted. "Wait, you look familiar." He gave a half shrug. "I get that a lot." She stared at him for a second, then looked away, clearly trying to place him. He didn't offer more. He never did. "Are you going to Florence too?" she asked, glancing at his suitcase. "No," he said. "I was on my way to Zurich, but I think I missed my flight chasing you down." Her eyes widened. "No, you didn't. You couldn't have." He checked his watch. "I did." "Oh my God. I'll pay you back. For the ticket. And the time. And oh God, I feel awful." He smiled. "You don't have to do that." "No, I do. That's insane. You literally gave up a flight for me." "It's fine. I have options." She tilted her head again, curious. "You always this chill about missing international flights?" Zayden chuckled. "Only when they're not urgent. You're either very rich or very unserious. Can I be both?" She laughed again. "Okay, well, I feel like I owe you coffee. At least." He looked at her. Really looked at her. She was wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt, jeans, and scuffed sneakers. No makeup. No pretenses. She was the opposite of the women he usually met: models at galas, influencers at yacht parties. And yet there was something magnetic about her. Something real. "All right," he said. "Coffee." They sat at the cafe near Gate B. She ordered a cappuccino. He got black coffee. "So, Florence?" he asked, stirring his drink. "Yeah. A friend of mine is letting me crash at her place for a few weeks. She's doing an artist residency out there. I just needed to get away." "From what?" She hesitated. "Life. Honestly, it's been a mess." "How so?" "I lost my job last month. My roommate moved in with her boyfriend and broke our lease without telling me. My ex showed up at my birthday party with his new girlfriend. And my car died. All in the same week." Zayden winced. "That's a lot." "I know, right?" She took a sip. "So I decided to blow what's left of my savings and go to Italy. I figured if I'm going to be broke and lost, might as well do it surrounded by pasta." He laughed. "That's one way to look at it. What about you?" "Zurich. Business meetings. Tech stuff. Nothing exciting." She stared at him again. "Okay, I know I've seen you somewhere. Are you, like, Famous. He leaned back, amused. Depends who you ask. She narrowed her eyes. You're not an actor. You're too quiet. Are you a CEO or something? He didn't answer right away. I knew it, she said, grinning. You're totally a CEO. Zayden gave a small nod. Guilty. What company? Voss Tech. Her eyebrows shot up. Wait. You're Zayden Voss. He nodded again. She blinked. You own the company that makes those smart security systems. My dad installed one in our house last year. He said the guy who started it was some genius college dropout. Again, guilty? Her mouth dropped open. You're a billionaire. Technically. She covered her face. Oh my God. I just offered a billionaire coffee. He grinned. Best offer I've had all day. She peeked through her fingers. This is insane. It's just coffee. No, it's not. You're Zayden Voss. I'm Sierra Nolan. I live in a studio apartment with a broken heater, and I just pawned my camera to buy this plane ticket. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. You're also the girl who made me miss a plane, laugh for the first time in weeks, and somehow, I'm not mad about either. Her face softened. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. They talked for another 20 minutes until her flight was called. She stood up reluctantly, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I should go. He stood too. Have a good trip, Sierra. She hesitated, then leaned up and kissed his cheek. Thank you for everything. He watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd at gate B27, passport safely in hand. Zayden stared at the empty coffee cup she'd left behind and realized something strange. He didn't want her to be gone, and he'd never felt that before. Zayden leaned against the sleek leather seat of his private jet as the engines hummed softly beneath him. The Zurich meeting had been rescheduled without consequence. His assistant had taken care of it before he even left the terminal. But he hadn't boarded another flight. Instead, he stared out the window at the New York skyline, his mind still circling back to the girl with the storm-colored eyes and a cappuccino smile who'd vanished through Gate B. He didn't know what had gotten into him. He'd never delayed business for anyone, not even family. Yet here he was, flying nowhere, thinking of a girl who didn't even have his number. Where to, Mr. Voss? The pilot asked through the intercom. He stared blankly. His usual decisiveness, flawless, instinctual, was gone. Florence, he said finally. As soon as possible. The jet lifted off an hour later. Sierra, meanwhile, had just stepped out onto a sun-drenched street in Santo Spirito, dragging her suitcase over uneven stone. Her friend's flat was tucked behind a trattoria that smelled like fresh basil and garlic. The building was old, the staircase narrow, but the apartment had charm: arched windows, chipped terracotta tiles, and a tiny balcony that overlooked a courtyard filled with orange trees. She dropped her bag and exhaled. Florence was louder than she'd imagined, but softer too. Paint peeled from the buildings in a way that felt romantic instead of negligent. The air tasted like espresso and rain. She hadn't been able to sleep on the flight. Her mind kept replaying the airport, the stranger with the coffee dark eyes, and the calm confidence of someone who never heard the word no. She pulled out her sketchbook. The pages were mostly blank. Her creativity had dried up somewhere between losing her job and watching her ex whisper in someone else's ear at her own party. But now, for the first time in weeks, her hand itched to fill the paper. She sketched the rooftops, the crooked shutters, the way the sun hit the cobblestones in long golden stretches. But her pencil kept drifting back to a strong jawline and a quiet smile. Her phone buzzed. Don't get distracted, her friend warned from the other room. You're here to reset, not to fall in love with some European guy who plays guitar on a bridge. I'm not, Sierra muttered, flipping the page. But the problem was he wasn't European, and he didn't play guitar. He was too sharply tailored for that, too deliberate. And he wasn't here. Or so she thought. Zayden arrived late the next morning, stepping off the jet into the soft Tuscan sun without a plan. He didn't know her last known address beyond what was printed in the passport. He hadn't even realized why he was there until he was already in the back seat of a black Maserati driving past vineyards and stone walls toward the city. He told himself it was curiosity, closure, maybe even concern. But when he stepped into the lobby of a boutique hotel near the Arno River, all he could think about was the way she'd kissed his cheek like it meant something. He opened his laptop and began searching. There were only so many people named Sierra Nolan in Florence. Fewer still who had entered the country the previous day. A few calls to local contacts confirmed that one had arrived on a flight from New York and was staying in the Altrano district. He found the address quietly. No one asked why the billionaire CEO of a tech empire was suddenly interested in a broke American art student. That was the thing about power, it rarely got questioned. He stood across the street from the apartment building for a long time, unsure what he was doing. He didn't want to frighten her. He didn't even know what he'd say. But fate intervened. She emerged just before sunset wearing a soft cream blouse tucked into worn jeans, her hair loose and windblown. She didn't see him at first, too busy talking to an older woman who handed her a paper bag filled with figs and grinned as Sierra attempted a few clumsy words in Italian. Zayden crossed the street as she turned the corner alone. Sierra! She stopped. Her head whipped around, eyes wide. Zayden? Her voice was a whisper, but it hit him like a shout. He walked up slowly, hands in his pockets. Didn't think I'd find you so easily? She blinked. What are you doing here? I wanted to see if you made it. I did, she said breathlessly. How did you even? He shrugged. You left an impression. She looked down, flustered. I didn't expect this. Neither did I. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she lifted her chin. Are you following me? If I say yes, will you run? I might. Then no, he said. I just happened to be in the neighborhood. She laughed, but it was soft and uncertain. I'm not here to mess up your escape, he said. I just couldn't stop thinking about you. She searched his face. You don't even know me. Then let me fix that. A pause. I'm going to a gallery opening tonight, she said. It's small. Local artists. Probably not your thing. I'll go. She narrowed her eyes. You wear suits that cost more than my rent. You're not going to be comfortable. I can handle discomfort. She hesitated, then nodded once. Fine. But if you start judging the wine or critiquing the lighting, I'm leaving. He smiled. Deal. That night, they walked along the Arno under glowing lanterns. The gallery was tucked behind a stone archway filled with canvases that smelled like drying oil and turpentine. Sierra introduced him to artists with wild hair and paint-stained fingers. Zayden listened, asked questions, and didn't once mention who he was. Later, they stood in front of a painting of a girl standing on a rooftop, her arms open to the wind. The brushstrokes were bold, chaotic, but the expression on the girl's face was serene. She looks like you, Zayden said. Sierra didn't answer. She was staring at the painting too closely, like it had just said something she wasn't ready to hear. Why did you really come here? She asked quietly. To find you, he said without hesitation. Her breath caught. But I don't want to throw your life off balance, he added. If you tell me to go, I'll leave. She looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Don't. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers and color and the sound of soft jazz floating through the gallery, Zayden Voss realized he wasn't chasing a girl anymore. He was falling. Sierra's fingers were dusted in charcoal by the end of the week. The studio above the bakery had no air conditioning and the heat warped the window panes, but she didn't care. She'd been sketching for hours, energy humming through her veins like some creative artery had finally unclogged. Her lines were sharper, bolder. She'd even started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. The easel was crowded with pieces. Not all of them made sense, but they felt alive. Like her. And still, her thoughts drifted back to Zayden. Not in a daydreamy, idle way, but in a way that made her pause mid-stroke and feel the breath leave her chest. He kept his word. He didn't crowd. He didn't pry. But he showed up. They met in quiet corners of Florence, places tourists hadn't found yet, courtyards overgrown with ivy, rooftops where the bells of Santo Spirito echoed like lullabies, a bookstore with a crooked staircase and espresso that could burn your tongue. One afternoon, they ducked into a museum during a downpour. Sierra shivered beside a marble statue, rubbing her arms. Cold? Zayden asked, already peeling off his jacket. It's fine. I don't mind. He draped it around her shoulders anyway. You don't have to mind everything. She glanced up at him. You always do that? What? Act like the world bends to your decisions. He didn't answer at first. Then he looked at her like she'd cracked something open in him. Most of the time it does, he said. But not with you. That night, they walked along the river again, this time without an agenda. Just steps in silence. She asked about his childhood, and he told her he'd grown up in San Diego, raised by a mother who worked double shifts and a father who left before he was old enough to remember the shape of his face. She asked why he'd gone into tech, and he said it was the only thing that made sense when nothing else had. Building systems, solving problems, it gave him control in a life that had felt like chaos. They stopped near the Ponte Vecchio, the golden light reflecting off the water. What about you? He asked. What made you want to create? Sierra stared at the ripples below. When I was little, I used to draw on the backs of cereal boxes. My mom would yell, but then she'd cut them out and tape them to the fridge. It was the one thing that made me feel visible. He didn't say anything, but his hand found hers. The next morning, she found him in the cafe across from her building. He was sipping something dark and bitter, flipping through a thick folder of printed documents. She slid into the chair across from him. You're working while in Florence? He closed the folder. Just keeping things running. I thought billionaires had people for that. We do, but I don't like handing over the wheel unless I have to. She reached for his cup. Do you ever relax? He let her take a sip, watching as she immediately made a face and pushed it back. That's a no, she said, wiping her mouth. Tastes like burnt ambition. I'll take that as a compliment. She leaned back in her chair. You know, this is starting to feel real. What is? Whatever this is. Her voice was quiet. You and me. Florence. It's not just a story anymore. He didn't blink. It never was a story. But it's temporary, right? He looked at her for a long beat. Does it have to be? I mean, you have a company to run. A life that runs on precision and private jets. I have a life that runs on expired Metro cards and borrowed paint. You have more than that. She shook her head. I'm not trying to be dramatic. Just realistic. Zayden leaned forward. Then let's be realistic. I've spent years building something that never made me feel the way you do. That's not temporary. That's clarity. Her walls went up immediately. You don't know me well enough to say that. Then let me know you better. Sierra stood abruptly. I have to go. I'm supposed to drop off some prints at a gallery down the street. He didn't follow her. But the next day a delivery arrived at her door. It wasn't flowers or jewelry. It was a roll of canvas. A deep, textured linen she hadn't touched since art school because it was too expensive, too luxurious for someone who lived paycheck to paycheck. Inside was a note, handwritten in black ink, paint something only you could create. She stared at it for minutes, heart thudding. She wanted to be angry at how easily he saw through her, how effortlessly he placed her in rooms she didn't feel worthy of. But underneath it all was something else. Hope. Later that week, her friend invited her to a private event at a villa outside the city. Dress code strict, her friend warned. No jeans, no sneakers. Bring your game. Sierra borrowed a black satin dress from the back of her friend's closet. It was 2 sizes too big, but she pinned it and hoped for the best. When the car arrived, she was surprised to see Zayden in the back seat. I didn't know you'd be here, she said, sliding in beside him. I asked your friend to invite me. She raised a brow. Why? Because I wanted to see you tonight. Not in paint-stained overalls. Not with charcoal on your nose. Just you. The villa was breathtaking. Lush gardens, candlelit paths, and string quartets tucked between olive trees. High society in its purest form, polished, poised, and utterly out of place for someone like Sierra. She tried to fade into the background, but Zayden kept her close. When people asked who she was, he said only, she's someone worth knowing. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. By the time they reached the terrace overlooking the vineyard, she was spinning. "I don't belong here," she whispered. Zayden turned to her, his voice low and certain. "You belong wherever you decide to stand." She met his eyes, and something inside her cracked. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But I'm still here." She stepped closer. "What happens when Florence ends?" He reached for her hand. "Then we start something new somewhere else." She didn't answer, not with words. But when she leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, it was the closest thing to yes she'd ever given. And for the first time in years, Zayden Voss didn't feel like he was building something for the world. He felt like he was building something for himself. The gallery director stared at Sierra, her mouth slightly open. "He wants to fund the entire show?" "Yes," Sierra said, her voice steady even though her pulse thundered in her ears. "And he doesn't want his name on it?" "No," the director looked down at the proposal again. "This space hasn't hosted a solo show in over 3 years. And certainly not for someone without formal representation." Sierra folded her arms. "He's not doing this as a favor. He saw my work. He believes in it. That should be enough." The woman considered her for a long, silent moment. "It opens Friday. You'll need to finish at least 12 pieces in the next 6 days." "I will." When Sierra left the gallery, she didn't call Zayden. She didn't tell him the meeting was a success. She didn't ask him to celebrate. Instead, she walked to the studio, locked the door, and began working with a determination she hadn't felt since her first year at RISD. For the next 4 days, she barely slept. Her friend brought food. Sometimes she remembered to eat. The only messages she responded to were from the gallery, confirming dimensions, framing, and layout. She didn't check social media. She didn't answer Zayden. She needed to prove something to herself more than anyone else. That she could do this. That she could stand on her own without clinging to someone else's influence, no matter how kind, no matter how rare. On the 5th day, she stepped back from the final canvas and exhaled. Her hands were stained with pigment, and her eyes ached from strain, but her chest was steady. The show was ready. The night of the opening, the gallery was packed. The scent of varnish and Prosecco mingled with the low hum of conversation. People stood in clusters, murmuring in Italian and English, some examining the pieces in silence. Sierra wore a simple black jumpsuit, her hair pinned up loosely, no makeup except for a streak of gold shadow at the corners of her eyes, a nod to one of her paintings. She stood near the back, observing, not interfering. "You didn't tell me it was tonight." She turned sharply. Zayden was standing behind her in a dark navy suit, the collar of his shirt open, no tie. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. "I didn't want you to come," she said honestly. He didn't flinch. "Why?" "Because I needed to know I could do it without you." He stepped closer. "And now that you have?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and handed him a small envelope. Inside was a check. "I sold 7 pieces already. That covers the investment." His brow furrowed. "You think this was a loan?" "I think I didn't want to owe you." Zayden looked down at the envelope, then back at her. "You don't owe me, Sierra. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Her voice was low, measured. "You show up, you give me things I didn't ask for, and then disappear when I pull away." "I didn't disappear. I gave you space." "Because you needed it. I needed clarity. And I got it." Zayden's jaw tightened. And the only thing scarier than needing you is not having you." He stared at her, the tension in his shoulders slowly unwinding, replaced by something else, something vulnerable. "I didn't know if you'd still want this," she added quietly. "After I shut you out. I didn't come here because I wanted something from you. I came because I couldn't stay away. But if you're asking whether I still want this," he paused, stepping closer, "then yes. I want this. I want you." Sierra's breath hitched. "But I don't want to be a fairy tale or a fantasy," she said. "I don't want to be the girl you remember when you go back to New York." Then come with me. She blinked. What? I'm not asking you to give up Florence or your work. I'm offering you a life where you don't have to choose between art and love. Come with me, or I'll stay here, whatever it takes. You'd stay? She asked softly. If that's where you are, yes. Sierra looked around the gallery. Her paintings lined the walls, abstract cities and fractured dreams, all spun from the chaos she'd clawed her way through. But in the center of each piece, often subtly hidden, was the same shape: a curve, a shoulder, a jawline. She hadn't realized it before, but now it was obvious. She'd been painting him. She looked back at Zayden, her chest tight. I don't want you to stay, she said. His expression didn't change. I want to go with you. He reached for her hand, then slowly, deliberately, and when their fingers locked, every doubt, every hesitation, melted. The gallery lights dimmed as the evening wore on, but neither of them noticed. They stood on the threshold, surrounded by whispers and color, two people who had collided by accident and refused to let go. Later that night, in the quiet of her studio, Zayden brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You know, he said, of all the things I thought I'd find when I picked up that passport, love wasn't one of them. Sierra leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. And yet, here we are. He kissed her then, not urgently, but fully, like a man who had everything and still knew the exact moment he'd found what he'd been missing. Months later, Sierra's paintings debuted in a Manhattan gallery under her name alone. Zayden stood at her side, his hand resting lightly on her waist as buyers circled and critics whispered. She didn't hide behind him, and he didn't pull her forward. They stood together, equal, unshakable, because once upon a time, a billionaire picked up a dropped passport, and instead of returning it and walking away, he followed the storm, and the storm led him home. Sierra stood beneath the soaring glass atrium of the Metropolitan Arts Grant Committee's main office, her palms damp despite the cool marble beneath her heels. She clutched the final portfolio of her Florence collection, each piece catalogued, labeled, and carefully wrapped. The committee had invited her to present after her Manhattan debut drew unexpected critical acclaim, and while she knew this was her moment to solidify a future in the art world, she couldn't shake the weight of what it meant. Zayden had offered to come, but she'd asked him to stay back. Not because she didn't want him there, but because this, like her gallery opening in Florence, needed to be hers first. A woman in a slate gray blazer stepped out of a side door. Ms. Nolan, we're ready for you. Inside, the panel waited in a sleek boardroom, sunlight pouring through the windows, catching the edge of a sculpture in the corner. Sierra walked to the front, her voice steady as she began. She spoke not just about technique, but about resilience. About rediscovering purpose in a city that didn't speak her language. About how her work was shaped by what she'd lost and what she'd unexpectedly found. When she finished, the panel thanked her, and she exited with her heartbeat in her throat. Outside, a familiar black car idled at the curb. She slid inside, and Zayden glanced up from his phone. Well, he asked. They'll let me know next week. His gaze lingered on her face. You're not pacing. That's new. She leaned back in the seat. I think I've finally learned how to breathe through waiting. The car pulled away, weaving through the late afternoon traffic, casting golden slants of light across Zayden's wristwatch and the dark fabric of his suit. Will you be okay if you don't get it? He asked. She turned her head toward him. I'll be disappointed, but not undone. He nodded. Good. That evening they returned to the loft, a space Zayden had purchased but insisted she make her own. The walls were still mostly bare, save for a few of her smaller canvases and a single framed photograph. A snapshot of a sun-drenched courtyard in Florence, her laughing mid-turn, unaware the camera had even been raised. She wandered into the kitchen while he opened a bottle of wine from a vineyard just outside of Greve. Without planning it, their life had started to take on rhythm. Her mornings were spent in the studio he'd helped her build on the top floor. His were split between meetings and quiet hours at home, laptop open, coffee in hand, and the occasional question about brush types or underpainting techniques that made her laugh. As she poured olive oil over a bowl of warm pasta, he set the table, lining the silverware with the same precision he used to negotiate billion-dollar deals. Over dinner, she glanced up. "Did you ever imagine this?" He looked at her, fork paused mid-air. "Which part?" "This. Us. A quiet Thursday. Pasta that's slightly overcooked. Me rambling about textured gesso while you pretend to understand." "I don't pretend," he said. "I Google after you fall asleep." She laughed, and the sound settled between them like a promise. Later, they stretched out on the rooftop terrace, the city buzzing below them in soft, humming tones. She curled against his chest, her fingers tracing idle shapes across the fabric of his shirt. "I used to think love would feel like fireworks," she murmured. "And now it feels like knowing someone will be there when the gallery's empty. When the paint's not coming. When I'm not sure of anything except the way you look at me." He brushed her hair back, his voice low. "I've built a lot of things, but nothing's ever made me more certain than you." She tilted her head up. "Even your empire?" He kissed her then slow, sure like the answer was obvious. The following week, Sierra received the grant. The call came mid-morning, and she barely managed to scribble the details before bursting into tears. Zayden found her sitting on the floor of her studio, her phone still clutched in her hand, her shoulders shaking. He didn't ask what happened. He simply sat beside her, wrapped his arms around her, and held her until her tears turned to laughter. The grant allowed her to open a community arts hub in Brooklyn, a space for underrepresented artists to create, collaborate, and exhibit. She named it Arco, after the archways in Florence that had once framed her view of the world. Zayden funded the renovation quietly, never asking for credit. When the opening night arrived, he stood at the back of the crowd, watching her speak with her usual blend of nerves and quiet fire. She caught his eye just once, and smiled. After the show, they walked home in the cool spring air, her heels swinging from one hand, his suit jacket draped over her shoulders. "Do you realize," she said, "that none of this would have happened if I hadn't dropped my passport?" He glanced sideways. "It wasn't an accident." She stopped walking. "What?" "I saw you first, at the gate. You looked like you were about to cry." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you saying I may have nudged it out of your bag?" Gently. She stared at him, mouth open. "You're lying." His fingers brushed hers. "Am I?" "You are unbelievable." "You're welcome." She tossed her shoe at him. He caught it mid-air. The next morning, they stood in the center of the studio, sunlight streaking across the floorboards. She was barefoot, wearing his t-shirt, and holding a mug that read "Art first, coffee later." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. No preamble, no speech. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a sapphire set in brushed gold. She stared at it, then at him. "I don't want a proposal that's about spectacle," he said. "I want it to be about you and me and all the quiet moments no one sees." Sierra took the ring, slipped it on, and looked up at him with eyes that no longer held uncertainty. "I'm saying yes," she said, "to everything." They married in a garden in Umbria, surrounded by olive trees and a handful of people who mattered. No press, no headlines, just them. She painted him a portrait on their wedding night, nothing realistic, just strokes and motion and color that somehow captured every part of him she loved. He hung it in the center of their home. Years later, her studio buzzed with interns and laughter. Arco had expanded to 2 more cities. Zayden's company grew, then shrank as he stepped back from the helm, choosing time with Sierra over boardrooms. And every evening, no matter where they were, he made her tea while she washed the paint from her hands. Because love, they'd learned, wasn't about fireworks. It was about showing up, again and again, without fanfare, without condition, and building a life where nothing, not even a misplaced passport, was ever truly lost.